The rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning the dirt beneath the towering oak tree into thick mud. The wind howled through the empty fields, carrying a sorrowful sound that cut through the night, a desperate, heart-wrenching cry. It wasn't the sound of a human, but it carried just as much pain. A pregnant German shepherd, her fur soaked and matted with dirt, lay curled up at the base of the tree, a thick metal chain wrapped tightly around her neck. She whimpered softly, her belly swollen with life, her eyes pleading for someone, anyone, to notice her. But the road was empty. The world had turned its back on her. For days she had been there, left behind by someone who once claimed to love her. She didn't understand why. All she knew was hunger, cold, and an unbearable loneliness. The world around her kept moving. Cars passed by in the distance, birds flew overhead, and yet no one stopped. No one saw her suffering. Or perhaps no one cared. Her body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the fear of what would happen next. Would she survive? Would her babies? Then, just when all hope seemed lost, a sound echoed through the silence. A small, innocent voice. It was soft at first, barely noticeable against the storm. But then it came again. A child's voice, filled with curiosity and concern. Tiny footsteps splashed through the puddles, growing closer. And then, standing just a few feet away, was a little boy no older than 5. His wide, brown eyes locked onto the dogs, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The child didn't see a dangerous stray. He didn't see an animal to be feared or ignored. He saw something else: pain, sadness, and a silent plea for help. His small hands tightened around the stuffed toy he carried, his mind racing. Most children would have turned away, scared of the large, unfamiliar dog. But not him. He took a slow, cautious step forward. The German shepherd lifted her head slightly, her ears twitching. She was weak, exhausted, and yet in that moment, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. But just as the boy was about to take another step, a voice called out from behind him. His mother. Her tone was urgent, laced with worry. "Noah! Stay away from that dog," she warned, rushing towards him. She had seen stray animals before. Some were sick, some were aggressive, and she couldn't risk her child getting hurt. But Noah didn't move. He turned to his mother, his small face filled with something she hadn't expected: determination. "Mommy," he said softly, pointing at the dog. "She's crying." His mother hesitated. She finally took a good look at the animal, at the way her ribs pressed against her skin, at the way her tired eyes begged for mercy. And then she saw something else: her swollen belly. This wasn't just a stray dog. This was a mother on the brink of giving birth, alone, afraid, and completely helpless. For a moment, an internal battle waged inside her. They weren't in a position to take in a stray. They had barely settled into their new home. Taking on a pregnant dog was too much. Too risky. Too complicated. But then she looked down at her son, at the way he was clutching his toy. His face full of concern, and she realized something. This wasn't just about the dog. It was about teaching her son kindness, about showing him what it meant to care for those who couldn't help themselves. With a deep breath, she made a choice. One that would change all of their lives forever. She stepped forward. The German shepherd flinched at first, her instincts telling her to be wary. But then she felt it. The warmth of a gentle touch. The woman knelt down, her fingers brushing against the dog's muddy fur. "It's okay, girl," she whispered. "You're safe now." The dog let out a soft, broken whimper, as if she finally understood. She wasn't alone anymore. But just as they were about to free her from the chain, something unexpected happened, something that left them all frozen in place. The dog's body tensed. Her breathing grew shallow. And then, with a sudden sharp cry, she collapsed onto the ground. A new wave of panic set in as Noah's mother realized what was happening. She was going into labor. Right there, in the middle of the storm, chained to a tree, the German shepherd was about to give birth. And there was no time to get her to safety. The woman turned to her son, her heart pounding. Noah, run to the car. Get the blanket. The little boy didn't hesitate. He sprinted through the rain, his small feet kicking up mud. The woman turned back to the dog, her mind racing. She wasn't a vet. She had no experience with this. But one thing was clear, she couldn't leave her. She had to help. The dog let out another strained whimper, her body trembling. And then the first puppy arrived. Noah came rushing back, breathless, the blanket clutched tightly in his hands. His eyes widened as he saw the tiny, fragile life now lying in the mud. But before he could say anything, the dog cried out again. Another one was coming. And another. The woman worked quickly, her hands shaking. She wrapped the newborns in the blanket, keeping them warm. She stroked the mother's head, whispering words of comfort. And through it all, Noah stayed by her side. His little hands reaching out, his heart open. And then, just when it seemed like the night couldn't hold any more surprises, something happened that no one expected. One of the tiny puppies, barely minutes old, did something that left both Noah and his mother in complete shock. Something that would bring them all to tears. The rain continued to pour, soaking everything in sight. The old oak tree swayed slightly, its branches creaking in the wind, as if whispering the secrets of the night. Noah's mother held her breath, watching in stunned silence. The tiny newborn puppy, barely able to move, had done something unexpected, something that made her heart tighten in her chest. The fragile little pup, its fur still damp from birth, had wiggled forward. Its tiny body trembled, its legs weak and unsteady. And then, with a soft, barely audible whimper, it pressed its tiny head against its mother's face. It was as if the newborn was trying to comfort her, trying to tell her she wasn't alone anymore. Noah gasped, his eyes widening with wonder. "Mommy, look. The baby. It knows she's sad." His mother swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. She had seen plenty of things in life, both beautiful and heartbreaking, but there was something different about this moment. It wasn't just about survival. It was about love. Even in the first moments of its life, the tiny puppy understood what its mother had gone through. It had felt her pain. And somehow, in the smallest, purest way, it was trying to ease it. The German shepherd let out a soft whimper, her tired eyes fluttering open. Her body was weak, shaking from exhaustion, but she managed to lift her head just enough to nuzzle her newborn. The connection between them was undeniable. Despite the cruel circumstances that had left her chained and forgotten, despite the suffering she had endured, she still had one thing left, her babies. Noah's mother exhaled, shaking off the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. She wasn't just standing in the rain, trying to help a stray dog. She was witnessing something rare, something powerful. And deep down, she knew this moment wasn't just changing the dog's life. It was changing hers too. But there was no time to dwell on emotions. More puppies were coming, and the German shepherd was still in danger. The chain around her neck was too tight, limiting her movement, making everything harder. Noah's mother knew she had to do something fast. She turned to her son, her voice calm but firm. "Noah, stay right here with the puppies. Keep them warm, okay?" The little boy nodded, carefully crouching down beside the newborns, shielding them from the cold. His small hands gently stroked their tiny bodies, his heart full of something he didn't quite understand yet, but would remember for the rest of his life. His mother quickly reached into her bag, searching for anything that could help. She had a small pocket knife on her keychain, but the chain was thick, rusted from the rain. She knew it wouldn't be enough. Panic threatened to rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay focused. There had to be a way. Then an idea struck her. The old farmhouse down the road, she had seen it before. It looked abandoned, but sometimes old farms had tools left behind. It was a risk, but she didn't have a choice. She looked back at the dog, then at her son. "Noah, I need you to stay here right next to her. Keep talking to her. Let her know she's not alone." The boy's eyes flickered with worry, but he nodded. "I will, Mommy. I promise." She didn't waste another second. She turned and ran, her feet splashing through the muddy path. The wind whipped against her, her breath coming in short bursts as she pushed forward. The farmhouse wasn't far, but in the darkness, every step felt like an eternity. When she finally reached it, she hesitated for just a moment. The house was old, its wooden boards weathered and broken. A faint memory tugged at the back of her mind. Someone had lived here years ago, an elderly man who had kept to himself. He had passed away, and the house had been empty ever since. She stepped onto the porch, her heart pounding. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as the wind pushed against it. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. She wasn't here to think about ghost stories or the eerie stillness of an abandoned home. She was here to save a life. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the darkness. Dust floated in the air, the scent of old wood and forgotten memories filling the space. Her gaze landed on a rusty toolbox sitting on a table near the doorway. Without hesitation, she grabbed it, flipping it open. Her fingers closed around a pair of heavy-duty pliers. Relief flooded through her. This would work. She didn't waste time. Clutching the tool tightly, she turned and ran back into the storm. By the time she returned to the tree, Noah was still sitting beside the dog, his small voice whispering softly. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she knew it didn't matter. He was keeping his promise. He was keeping her calm. She dropped to her knees, quickly setting to work on the chain. The rust had corroded the metal, making it stiff and stubborn. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, but she didn't stop. She gritted her teeth, her hands shaking as she worked the pliers against the metal. Then, with a final snap, the chain broke. The German shepherd flinched at first, as if she didn't quite believe it. But then, as the heavy metal fell away, something in her changed. She lifted her head, her ears perking slightly. It was as if she had just taken her first breath of freedom. Noah let out a gasp. "Mommy! She's free!" His mother exhaled, a mix of exhaustion and relief washing over her. But there was still one more challenge ahead. The dog wasn't out of danger yet. She was still weak, still in labor, and they couldn't leave her here in the cold. He turned to Noah. "We need to get her somewhere safe. Somewhere warm." But before she could come up with a plan, the dog did something unexpected. Slowly, shakily, she pushed herself up. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she didn't collapse. Instead, she turned her head, looking directly at Noah. Then, as if understanding everything, she took a step forward. She was trusting them. Noah's mother's heart swelled. She knew this wasn't just about rescuing an animal. It was about something bigger. A connection that had formed in the most unexpected way. But the night wasn't over. There was still more to come. More surprises, more heartache, and one final mystery that would change everything. The wind had eased a little, but the rain still fell in a steady rhythm, soaking everything around them. The German shepherd, though weak and exhausted, took slow, unsteady steps forward. Her swollen belly hung low, her breath coming in short, tired bursts. She had already given birth to 3 tiny puppies, their small bodies curled up in the blanket that Noah held close. But it wasn't over yet. There were still more coming, and they needed to get her to safety before it was too late. Noah's mother glanced around, her mind racing. There was no way they could carry her. She was too heavy, too fragile. Driving was out of the question too. The closest vet was miles away, and she doubted the dog would survive such a long, bumpy ride in this state. The only option was to bring her somewhere warm nearby, at least until she was strong enough to be moved properly. She turned to Noah, who was still holding the blanket with the newborns. His small fingers gently stroked the tiniest pup, the one that had nuzzled against its mother earlier. His face was filled with quiet wonder, but there was also something else in his eyes, a deep concern, as if he understood the weight of the moment far beyond his young years. "She's really tired, Mommy," he said softly. "She needs help." His mother nodded. "I know, sweetheart. We're going to help her. But we need to move fast." She looked back at the dog, searching for any sign of where she might have come from. If someone had left her here, maybe they lived nearby. Maybe they were still around. But something in her gut told her that whoever had done this had no intention of coming back. Then, just as she was about to make a decision, the dog did something strange. She stopped walking. Her ears twitched slightly, her nose lifting into the cold night air. Then, with a soft whimper, she turned her head, looking past them, toward the dark tree line beyond the road. Noah's mother followed her gaze, her brow furrowing. There was nothing there. Just the thick woods stretching into the distance. But the dog didn't look away. She let out another soft, almost desperate sound, her body tensing. Noah tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mommy, I think she wants us to follow her." His mother hesitated. Didn't make sense. The dog was weak, barely able to stand, and yet, there was something in her posture, in the urgency of her movements, that made it clear. She wanted them to go somewhere. "All right," she murmured, adjusting the blanket in her arms. "Let's see where she takes us." Step by slow step, the German shepherd led them forward, away from the main road, away from the tree where she had been left. The ground was wet and slippery, but Noah's mother kept her balance, glancing back occasionally to make sure her son was keeping up. The farther they went, the quieter everything seemed. Even the wind had settled into a soft hush, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Then suddenly the dog stopped again. They had reached a small clearing, partially hidden by the thick undergrowth. At first, it looked like nothing more than a patch of dirt and leaves. But then Noah's mother saw it. A makeshift shelter, barely more than a pile of wood and old cloth stacked together. Then, the realization hit her instantly. This wasn't just where the dog had been left. This was where she had been living. Noah gasped. "Mommy, look. There's something inside." She stepped closer, carefully pulling back one of the damp pieces of fabric that had been draped over the entrance. And then her breath caught in her throat. Inside the shelter, huddled together in the cold, were two more tiny puppies. They were much smaller than the ones in the blanket Noah held. Their fur was damp, their little bodies curled up tightly against each other for warmth. One of them barely stirred, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The other let out a weak, barely audible cry. Noah's mother's heart clenched. These puppies had been born earlier, perhaps hours ago, maybe even a full day before. They had been waiting, hoping their mother would return. And she had. The German shepherd let out a soft, broken whimper as she stepped forward, lowering her head toward her babies. It was a sound of relief, of sorrow, of apology. She had been taken away from them, left in chains, unable to return. But she had never forgotten them. Noah knelt down beside the shelter, his small hands reaching out carefully. "Mommy, they're really cold," he whispered. His eyes shone with worry. What if they don't wake up?" His mother swallowed hard. She had no answer for him. She didn't know if they were strong enough to survive. But she knew one thing, they couldn't leave them here. She quickly scooped up the tiny pups, wrapping them in the blanket with their siblings. The German shepherd let out another low sound, this time resting her head against Noah's leg, as if she understood what they were doing, what they were trying to do for her family. "We need to go," Noah's mother said, adjusting the bundle in her arms. "We'll take them home, get them warm, and figure out what to do next." She expected the dog to resist, to hesitate. But she didn't. She simply looked up, her tired eyes full of something unspoken. And then slowly she started walking again, this time following them. The journey back was slow, careful. By the time they reached the car, the rain had lightened to a drizzle. Noah's mother laid the puppies down gently in the back seat, wrapping them in the driest parts of the blanket. Then she helped the mother dog inside, making sure she was as comfortable as possible. As they drove home, Noah sat quietly, watching the German shepherd. She was curled up protectively around her newborns, her body still trembling but her breathing steady. Every few moments, she would glance up at Noah and his mother, her eyes filled with a silent gratitude that words could never express. Noah reached out, his small fingers brushing against her muddy fur. "We're gonna take care of you," he whispered. "I promise." His mother gripped the wheel a little tighter, stealing a glance at them through the rearview mirror. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if all the puppies would survive the night. But she did know one thing. She had never expected to find them. Never expected to be here, driving through the quiet streets with a car full of fragile, helpless lives. And yet, somehow, she knew, this wasn't just about rescuing them. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Something she couldn't yet understand. Something that would change all of their lives forever. The drive home felt longer than it actually was. Every passing second carried the weight of uncertainty. The German Shepherd lay curled up in the back seat, her body shielding her newborn puppies. Her breathing was slow and uneven, exhaustion pressing down on her like a heavy weight. Noah sat beside her, his small hands resting gently on one of the tiny pups, as if his touch alone could keep them safe. Noah's mother kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the fragile family in the back. She knew they weren't out of danger yet. The mother dog had lost too much strength, and the two puppies they had found in the shelter were frighteningly cold. She had no idea how long they had been without warmth or food. As they turned onto their street, a single thought consumed her. What if they were too late? The car came to a stop in the driveway. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was still heavy with the night's chill. She quickly unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to Noah. "Sweetheart, I need you to help me," she said, keeping her voice calm. "We have to be really gentle, okay?" Noah nodded without hesitation. His mother carefully lifted the mother dog, cradling her weakened body in her arms while Noah held onto the bundled puppies. The German Shepherd let out a weak whimper, but she didn't resist. She knew they were trying to help. Inside the house, warmth wrapped around them like a protective blanket. Noah's mother had already prepared a soft space in the living room, laying down towels and an old comforter near the fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was warm and dry. She placed the mother dog down carefully, helping her settle in. Noah knelt beside the puppies, unwrapping the blanket and placing them next to their mother. The tiniest one let out a faint cry, its weak body shivering. The German Shepherd, despite her exhaustion, lifted her head slightly. Her tongue gently brushed over each of her babies, her motherly instincts stronger than her weakness. But even as she tried, her energy was fading fast. Noah's mother felt a tight knot form in her chest. She couldn't just sit here and hope for the best. They needed help. She grabbed her phone and quickly searched for an emergency vet clinic. Her hands trembled as she pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. "Hello, this is River Valley Animal Hospital. What's your emergency?" Noah's mother barely took a breath before speaking. "I found a stray German Shepherd. She was chained to a tree and she just gave birth, but she's very weak. Some of the puppies are cold and barely moving. I don't know what to do." There was a brief silence on the other end before the woman's voice softened. "Stay calm. Keep the mother and puppies warm. Do you have a heating pad or warm towels?" "Yes," she replied quickly. "We have a fireplace. I have them near it now." "That's good. Try rubbing the weaker puppies gently to stimulate circulation. If you have a bottle and puppy formula, you can try feeding them, but don't force it if they won't take it. Can you bring them in?" Noah's mother hesitated. The vet clinic was on the other side of town. The drive would take at least 20 minutes, maybe more with the wet roads. She wasn't sure the mother dog could handle the trip. I don't know if she's strong enough to move again," she admitted. The vet paused before speaking again. "Then keep monitoring her. If she stops responding or her breathing gets worse, bring her in immediately." "Okay," Noah's mother whispered. "Thank you." She hung up and turned back to the small family lying on the floor. Noah was rubbing one of the weaker puppies with a towel, just like the vet had suggested. His face was serious, his little hands careful but determined. "She's gonna be okay, right, Mommy?" he asked quietly. Noah's mother didn't answer right away. She wanted to tell him yes, that everything would be fine. But she didn't know for sure. Instead, she knelt down beside him and wrapped her arms around his small shoulders. "We're doing everything we can," she said softly. "That's all we can do." For the next hour, they stayed by the mother dog's side, doing everything possible to keep her and the puppies warm. Noah's mother used a warm bottle to try and feed the smallest pups, while Noah whispered soft words to their mother, his voice filled with quiet hope. The German Shepherd never took her eyes off her babies. Even in her weakened state, her love for them was stronger than anything else. Then, just as things seemed to settle, something changed. The mother dog suddenly let out a weak, strained whimper, her body tensing. Her breathing became labored, her chest rising and falling unevenly. Noah's mother's heart jumped. Something was wrong. "Noah, step back," she said quickly, her voice laced with urgency. Noah hesitated but obeyed, his wide eyes filled with fear. The German Shepherd let out another soft cry, then, suddenly, her body convulsed slightly. "No, no, no," Noah's mother murmured, panic creeping into her voice. She pressed her fingers gently against the dog's side, feeling for her breathing. It was still there, but it was weak, too weak. The realization hit her like a wave of ice. She was fading. Noah's mother felt a lump rise in her throat. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had saved her, brought her to safety. She was supposed to get better. But now, as the dog's trembling body lay before her, she knew she was running out of time. And the worst part, Noah was watching. Noah's mother's hands trembled as she hovered over the German Shepherd, feeling the slow, weakening rise and fall of her chest. The dog let out another soft whimper, her eyelids drooping, her body shivering despite the warmth of the fire. The puppies, unaware of their mother's fragile state, wriggled close to her for comfort, their tiny whimpers filling the room. Noah clutched his mother's arm, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy, she's not okay, is she?" His mother swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "She's very tired, sweetheart," she said gently. "But we're going to do everything we can to help her." Deep down, fear clawed at her chest. She had seen animals in distress before, but this was different. This mother dog had fought so hard to survive. Through the cold, the chains, the pain of giving birth alone. She had held on for her puppies. But now, with safety finally in her grasp, it was as if her body was giving out. Noah's mother grabbed her phone again, ready to call the vet back. But before she could dial, a noise outside made her freeze. Car. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not this late at night. The engine rumbled just outside the house, its headlights briefly flashing through the front window before shutting off. Noah tensed beside her. "Who's that?" His mother didn't answer. Her heart pounded as she stood up, her mind racing. Was it a neighbor? Someone who had seen them bring the dog home? Or worse, was it the person who had abandoned her in the first place? She hurried to the window and peeked through the curtain. A dark-colored truck sat in the driveway, its engine still ticking from the cold. A tall figure stepped out, dressed in a heavy coat, his face shadowed under the dim porch light. A deep unease settled in her stomach. Whoever he was, he hadn't knocked yet. He was just standing there, staring at the house. Noah tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, who is it?" "I don't know," she murmured. "Stay here." She moved toward the door but didn't open it. Instead, she cleared her throat and called out, "Can I help you?" For a long moment, the man didn't respond. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. "You have my dog." Her breath caught. The words hit like a punch to the chest. "Well, it couldn't be." She turned back to the German Shepherd, lying weakly on the floor, her body curled protectively around her puppies. Even in her fragile state, she lifted her head slightly, ears twitching. Noah's mother's pulse quickened. This wasn't right. If this man was her owner, why had she been left in the cold? Why had she been chained to a tree? Why was she in this condition? Her grip on the doorknob tightened. "Your dog," she repeated, forcing her voice to stay steady. The man nodded. "Yeah." His tone was flat, unreadable. She got loose a couple days ago. Been looking for her. A chill ran down her spine. Something about the way he spoke, so casual, so emotionless, made her skin crawl. She didn't believe him. Not for a second. Noah, still standing near the fire, clutched the blanket around the puppies. His eyes flickered between his mother and the door. He could feel the tension in the air, even if he didn't fully understand why. His mother inhaled slowly. She had to think, had to be careful. I found her chained up, she said, watching his face closely. Out in the woods. She was starving. She had puppies out there alone. The man's jaw tensed. His gaze flicked past her into the house. Yeah, well, she's mine. I want her back. Well, everything inside her screamed no. Her gut told her exactly what kind of person this was. Someone who had thrown this dog away like she didn't matter. Someone who hadn't cared if she survived. And now, for some reason, he wanted her back. Noah's mother straightened her shoulders. Do you have proof she's yours? The man's expression darkened. I don't need proof, he said flatly. She's my dog. The German shepherd let out a weak, barely audible growl. It was soft, but it was there. A low, wary rumble from deep in her throat. And that was all the proof Noah's mother needed. The dog was afraid of him. Noah's mother forced herself to stay calm. If she belongs to you, then you wouldn't mind if I call the vet and have them confirm it, she said carefully. Or maybe the local shelter. They'll want to make sure she's going to the right place. A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face. Look, lady, I don't have time for this. His voice dropped lower, more insistent. Just give me my dog. Noah suddenly spoke up. She doesn't want to go with you. His voice was small but firm. The man's eyes snapped to him. Noah didn't flinch. He stood beside the mother dog, his small body shielding her as if he could protect her himself. Noah's mother's heart clenched. She reached behind her, resting a hand on Noah's shoulder. I think you should leave, she said, her voice steady. The man's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might argue. But then, after a long pause, he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Fine, he muttered. Keep her. Without another word, he turned, stomped back to his truck, and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life, tires crunching against the wet gravel. Within seconds, the truck disappeared down the street, its red taillights fading into the darkness. Noah's mother let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking. Mommy, Noah whispered. Is he gonna come back? She didn't know. And that terrified her. The German shepherd let out a soft, exhausted sigh. Her body, tense only moments ago, finally relaxed. Noah's mother knelt beside her, gently stroking her muddy fur. You're safe now, she murmured. We won't let anyone hurt you again. But even as she said the words, a deep unease settled in her chest. Because she knew, this wasn't over. Not yet. The house was silent, except for the soft crackling of the fireplace and the rhythmic breathing of the German shepherd. Noah sat beside her, his tiny fingers gently stroking the fur between her ears. His mother had tucked him in hours ago, but he had quietly slipped back out, unable to sleep knowing the dog and her puppies needed him. She had grown weaker, but her eyes never left her babies. Noah's mother stood by the window, peeking out through the curtains. The street was empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man had left, but she couldn't trust that he was really gone. His presence still lingered in her mind, his cold, emotionless voice echoing in her ears. She had seen people like him before, the kind who didn't take no for an answer. She turned back to the German shepherd, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. She was safe here. But for how long? A sudden noise outside made her jump. A soft crunching of gravel. Her heart pounded. She grabbed her phone, holding it tightly as she moved toward the front door. She hesitated, listening carefully. Nothing. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe it was just the wind. And then, another sound. Closer this time. A shadow passed by the window. Fear shot through her like ice. She took a slow, steady breath, her fingers tightening around her phone. She wasn't going to let this happen. Not tonight. Not ever. She quickly locked the door and backed away, her eyes darting toward Noah. He was still sitting by the fire, unaware of the growing tension in the room. A sharp knock shattered the silence. Noah's mother's breath caught in her throat. "Mommy!" Noah's voice was barely a whisper. "Is it him?" She didn't answer. Instead, she quickly grabbed Noah's hand and pulled him close. The German shepherd lifted her head weakly, a faint growl escaping her throat. Even in her fragile state, she could sense the danger. The knock came again, louder this time, more impatient. Noah's mother's mind raced. Should she answer? Should she call for help? Should she pretend no one was home? Then a voice. "Ma'am, this is Officer Reynolds with the local police." Her body went rigid. "Police." She glanced through the peephole and saw a man in uniform standing on the porch. His badge glinted under the dim porch light. Still, she didn't open the door. "How do I know you're really an officer?" she asked through the door, her voice steady but firm. There was a brief pause. Then the man held up his badge. "You can call the station to verify," he said. "But I promise you I'm here to help." She hesitated for only a second before unlocking the door and cracking it open. The officer gave her a reassuring nod. "Sorry to show up this late," he said, "but we got a report that a man was seen circling your property." Her stomach dropped. "That man, he was here earlier," she said quickly. "He claimed the dog was his." The officer's expression darkened. "We've been looking for him. He's been suspected of running illegal breeding operations. We believe he's abandoned several dogs in the past." Noah's mother's blood ran cold. The German shepherd let out another weak growl, her body tensing. The officer glanced past her and saw the dog lying by the fire, the small puppies curled up beside her. His face softened. "You saved her," he said. "And her babies." Noah stepped forward. "She doesn't want to go with him," he said firmly. "She's scared of him." The officer nodded. "And she won't have to." Then, just as he spoke, the radio on his shoulder crackled. A voice came through, tense and hurried. "Suspect spotted near the residence. Moving in now." Noah's mother's breath caught. The officer immediately stepped back, scanning the area. His hand moved to his holster. "Stay inside," he ordered. "Lock the doors." Noah's mother wasted no time. She shut the door, locking it again as her pulse thundered in her ears. Outside, heavy footsteps pounded against the pavement. Shouts rang through the night. Then silence. Minutes passed. Finally the radio crackled again. "Suspect in custody." Noah's mother let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. The officer knocked lightly on the door. She opened it just enough to see him. "He won't bother you again," he said. "He's being taken in for questioning." Relief flooded her, but she still felt the lingering weight of fear. "What will happen to him?" she asked. The officer's jaw tightened. "With enough evidence, we can make sure he never does this again." She nodded, hoping it was true. Noah reached for her hand. "Does this mean she can stay?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. The officer smiled. "That's up to you." Noah's mother looked down at the German shepherd. Despite everything she had been through, there was something different in her eyes now. Something softer, something that hadn't been there before. "Trust." Noah knelt beside her, gently resting his head against her fur. "You're home now," he whispered. The mother dog let out a tired sigh, closing her eyes. And for the first time in a long time she was safe. The house finally felt calm again, though the weight of the night still lingered in the air. Noah's mother sat on the floor beside him, her arms wrapped around his small shoulders. The warmth of the fire flickered across their faces, casting soft shadows on the walls. The German shepherd lay with her puppies nestled close, her eyes half closed in exhaustion, but there was something peaceful in the way she rested now. It was as if she finally understood that she didn't have to fight anymore. She was home. Noah let out a small yawn, his fingers still gently tracing the mother dog's fur. "Mommy," he murmured sleepily, "do you think she's happy?" His mother smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I think she's finally safe," she said. "And I think she knows we love her." Noah nodded, satisfied with that answer. His small hand moved to one of the puppies, who let out a tiny yawn of its own before curling even closer to its mother. Outside, the police car's flashing lights had disappeared down the road, taking with them the weight of fear that had pressed down on their home. The man, the one who had hurt this beautiful creature, was gone. Whatever happened next was out of their hands. But Noah's mother had a feeling that justice would be served. For now, all that mattered was that this little family had made it through the storm. Over the next few days, the German Shepherd grew stronger. Noah and his mother took turns feeding her, making sure she had everything she needed to regain her strength. She was still weak, but each morning, her eyes seemed a little brighter, her movements a little steadier. The puppies, on the other hand, were full of life. Their tiny tails wagged whenever Noah came near, and their playful barks filled the house with warmth. Even when they stumbled over their own feet, they always got back up, full of energy and curiosity. It didn't take long for the German Shepherd to start trusting them completely. At first, she had been wary, keeping a watchful eye on Noah's mother whenever she got too close. But as the days passed, something shifted. One morning, when Noah's mother reached out to refill her water bowl, the dog did something she had never done before. She nudged her hand with her nose, a quiet but undeniable gesture of trust. Noah's mother felt her heart swell. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." One evening, as Noah sat on the porch with one of the puppies in his lap, he looked up at his mother with wide, hopeful eyes. "Can we keep them all?" he asked. His mother smiled, running a hand through his messy hair. "We're going to find good homes for the puppies," she told him gently. "Families who will love them just as much as we do." Noah looked down at the puppy in his arms, frowning slightly. "But what about her?" he asked, nodding toward the mother dog, who was lying near the porch steps, watching them with soft eyes. His mother glanced at the German Shepherd, then back at her son. She had been asking herself the same question. The truth was, she hadn't planned on keeping her. She had told herself that once the dog was fully recovered, she would find her a home, a good one, with a family that could give her all the love and care she deserved. But now, looking at her, something inside her knew the answer. The German Shepherd had already found her home. Noah's mother smiled. "I think she's already part of our family," she said. Noah's face lit up. "Really?" His mother nodded. "Really?" Noah turned back to the dog, grinning. "Did you hear that? You're staying with us." The German Shepherd wagged her tail slowly. Her eyes filled with a warmth that hadn't been there before. From that moment on, she was no longer just a rescue. She was theirs. Days turned into weeks, and the mother dog, who they decided to name Hope, became stronger with each passing day. She no longer flinched at loud noises. She no longer cowered when someone reached out to pet her. She learned to trust, to love, to play. And Noah, he had found a best friend. Hope followed him everywhere, through the backyard, down the street when they went for walks, even to his bedroom at night, where she curled up beside his bed like a silent protector. The bond between them was unbreakable, built on trust, love, and a second chance at life. Eventually the puppies found new homes. Noah's mother made sure that each one went to a family who would love them the way they deserved. It was bittersweet watching them go, but she knew it was the right thing to do. Hope watched them leave, her eyes filled with understanding. She had done her job. She had protected them. Now it was time for them to start their own journeys. But she wasn't alone. She still had her family. One night, as Noah lay in bed, Hope curled up beside him, her head resting near his pillow. His mother stood in the doorway, watching them with a smile. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered. Noah yawned, snuggling closer to Hope. "Good night, Mommy." As his mother turned off the light and stepped out of the room, She took one last look at the dog who had once been lost, broken, and abandoned. Now she was home. She was loved. She was safe. And for the first time in her life, Hope closed her eyes and slept without fear.